now we're going to talk about doing hair. I really like to make sure that I do some variety of hairstyles in my croquis. You can see that in these ones that I have right here and this collection and this one that I'm working on currently. I think hair is a really great way to add character to your croquis and to kind of create a mood within your collection. But at the same time, you want to remember that the hair is not the focal point of your collection and to not make it too crazy distracting that it's going to take away from the design itself. So I'm going to show you guys just a couple different ways to do hair and how to shade it. There's 1,000,003 different hairstyles, so I'm not going to cover that, but I'm just going to cover what? There are so many different ways to do hair and so many different styles that you can do. So I want to just teach you guys the basics that I know I needed to get myself started into drawing hair, and then I'll let you guys go and try out different designs on your own. So a couple things to remember about hair in general is that hair is a shape rather than individual strands. So when creating these hairstyles right here, I really just made sure to add volume from the top and then go around and close out this shape around the neck, right? And so the same thing goes here. You're not drawing the individual strands, and if you want to make little cuts in your strands or in your hair, that's fine, but don't get too worried about drawing out the whole head of hair by individual strands. And by that I mean just drawing a normal shape. When drawing a shape of hair, I usually just draw the whole outline of the hair itself, and then I will go in and I will erase or I will tweak any lines that I don't think fit with the croquis or just don't fit with the hairstyle in general, and I'll tweak it a little bit and I'll just kind of go back and forth until I find a general shape that I like. From here, you want to make sure that you are shading with the hairline, and by that I mean her hair is going down like this, so you're going to shade up and down. You're not going to shade horizontally. This is super important, especially when you're creating highlights in your hair. You can see that the highlight goes across the hair itself, right? So the grain of your, her hair is going back into these ponytails right here, and so her highlight is going to go perpendicular to that line of hair. And when her hair starts to go down, the highlights will go more horizontally. Another thing to remember is where you have shadows and where you have highlights in the hair. So with this croquis, you can see that the roots are darker, and this is because naturally our roots are darker than the rest of our hair. That's just how it is. The same thing goes for the tips. The tips are usually darker than the rest of the head of hair, and there are a lot of shadows under the hair because we have hair that goes around the side of our face and blocks light from getting into that section of hair under the head or behind the head. Another thing to point out is that her hair is going back into these buns, and so her highlights are perpendicular to the direction in which her hair is moving. However, when you get to these buns, her hair is being wrapped around, so the highlight is going to go vertically, right? Because it's perpendicular to the direction of the hair itself. Another thing to remember, I render a lot of wavy and curly hair, and so when I do this, it's really important for me to create shadows under the top of the wave. So when the hair goes out, it's going towards the light source. It's going out, it's creating volume, which is taking up that light source, which is creating highlight. And so when the hair goes under itself, it's creating a shadow cast by this top part of the wave. And so you're going to have shadows under all of these, under all these curves that go out towards your light source. That's how you can render hair like this, but it's not going to look three-dimensional or have a lot of volume until you add those highlights. The same thing goes for straight hair. You have highlights, but they're not as dramatic as with the wavy hair. So in this croaky right here, we have a lot of highlight in the bangs because they're curved, because there's a point where the light source is hitting the hair first, and then there's shadows cast by the hair itself. And then you will have highlights at the top of the head, but not so much at the bottom, especially because the hair is going straight down, the shadow is being cast, and it's just going to go all the way down. If the hair were to go outwards, you would see another highlight where the hair is at its widest point. However, because the hair is going straight down, it will not have any highlights. I like to do some swatches to figure out which colors are going to work together, which ones look like the same color of different values, and then I will shade my croaky from there. It's really important to make sure that you are picking colors that are of the same color. Wait, what? What? Where's my eraser? Oh. It's really important to make sure that you pick markers that are of the same color, just of different values. I was taking way too long trying to explain this, so VoiceOver Jen is back. When you get a set of markers, generally you could get a set of grays that is warm gray and cool grays. And they'll have like a number on it to represent a percentage, which is like the value or the saturation of your grays. And so warm grays have yellow undertones, and cool grays are going to have blue undertones. They're going to be a little bit icier. That's what I used for this collection. I used cool grays for that. And so when you decide to use marker to draw your hair, you want to just kind of take note of either different values of the same color in your markers. And by that, I mean like light pink and a darker pink, or, you know, whatever color you want to use, but it looks like the same color. Like you wouldn't use a ballet pink and a fuchsia hot pink because it just doesn't look like the same color of different values. And so that's something to keep in mind if you want to take swatches and note those. That's what I usually do. I just have like a little like sheet with all of my browns and my grays or whatever, and all the markers that are the same color but different value. Or you can layer your markers if you only want to buy one. You just have to kind of layer it up a little bit. And you can go in with colored pencil and, you know, make your really dark shadows. But if you want that really intense difference between your highlights and your shadows, then I would suggest using several markers of different values to accomplish that goal. Let's start with the middle hairstyle. This is the easiest one to render. I'm going to go through and erase some of these lines really quick. And another thing to remember, when rendering hair, I find it's easier to render the skin first and then go in and fill in the hair. In this case, I'm just going to do the hair. What you're going to do is you are going to take your lightest shade of marker and you're going to figure out where your highlight is. From there, you will go in and you will fill in light strokes, picking up the marker to create these little tapers at the end. And you're going to fill in everywhere but that highlight. When I'm doing bangs, I like to add a little bit of a shadow between the bangs and the hair itself, just to bring the bangs forward. And I'm still drawing in vertical strokes. Also, notice how I add more shadow under the face and around the neck and the part of the hair that's going behind the head and behind the neck. That's just because there's no light reaching these areas. It's hidden by hair or face.
Once that's dry, you're going to go in with your second shade of marker, your darker shade, and you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to pick up the marker a little bit sooner. So some of that first layer is still showing. Now you're starting to like blend different layers and you're starting to add value and more color, and you're starting to mix colors between these two markers to create that darker value of the shadow.
So this is your mid-tone marker. This middle shade is the shade that you would consider your hair to be, right? So this is not your highlight shade, not your low light shade. It's just that middle color of your hair.
Another thing to note is that when you are doing this, when you're putting in your midtones, you want to leave those highlights as white as you can, especially if you want that that dramatic shine that I have in my croquis. I leave the paper white. You can see the paper through it. So if you don't want that, you can, cover that up a little bit more with the lighter shade, but leave the highlights white.
Once you let that dry for a few minutes, then you'll go in with this third color and you will just add these darkest shadows in the darkest places only. So you're going to add the shadow under the hairline, at the very tip of the hair, especially the base of the bangs and the roots. Now that we've kind of got a feel for this, we're going to talk a little bit about wavy hair and how to render that. So I'm going to take my two markers and I'm going to erase some of these lines so that I can still see it a little bit, but I'm not worried about this graphite getting stuck under the marker. Mapping out your highlights might help you render curly hair for the first time. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's also, if you don't think about it too much, if you just don't overthink it, it's a lot easier than you think. So I'm picking my light source to come from there, and
so here I am adding little tiny boxes on the outermost part of each like curl or wave, and this is just to represent the highlights. So this is where your light source hits the hair first, and then it'll follow along the hair and it'll kind of fade out, but this is going to be where you keep the white of your paper showing. So those are your highlights. It's all on one side and then a little bit on the other side.
And from here, I'll just go in with my kneaded eraser. I'll pick them up just a little bit. And I'll take my lightest marker and start shading everywhere but those highlights, going with the direction of the hair.
I am so sorry. I didn't realize that my mammoth hand was taking up the entire head. You'll see in just a second, but it's basically the same thing as the bangs, just on a smaller scale. The only thing to remember is that you leave those highlights open and that you are picking up your marker to kind of create those streaks.
If you're worried about your highlights being too small or covering them up, make sure that you leave a little bit more room than you think you need for your highlights. You can always go back and close them up a little bit, but once you've covered them up with marker, good luck getting it out. Like, you will not.
I'll take my silent pause to remind you to shade along the hair, so with the grain, if you will. So following all of those curves for each wave or curl, whatever you are doing. And then another thing is you see on my highlights how I don't outline the hair? It's because there's a highlight there. You don't need to see the outline of the hair, especially if you look at a real photo of somebody. That highlight goes all the way to the edge basically. So sometimes I'll pick it out a little bit, I'll bring it a little bit closer, but I don't take it all the way across.
From here, I'll let this dry for a minute and then I'll go in with my darker color and I will go into the highlights and carve out the highlights. So when you have curly hair, you may notice that your hair kind of goes up and around rather than with straight hair when it might come over the face a little bit. Curly hair tends to come up and have some volume upwards and then go out and around. So that's something to remember when drawing your hair. And we're adding shadows right under the highlight to create depth, to show that these highlights are created by volume. And we're adding shadows under the hair. And at the tips. Now that I have those two laid in, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to fill in a little bit more of this highlight. I think my highlights are a little bit too big, especially because her hair is a little bit darker. With lighter hair, you can leave more room for highlight and it'll look natural, but with darker hair, sometimes the highlight just is a little bit too big. And so I'm just going to take it in a little bit, especially down here. And there you go. When shading your face, like I said, it's better to shade it in before because you're going to be adding these little hair-like strokes. When rendering curly hair or hair that goes out, it's important to have these little tiny strokes that represent the hair coming out of the head, the little hairline. I don't like saying the hair that comes out of the head. Just created by just little tiny strokes to create that that textured hairline. And that's another reason to draw in your skin before rendering your hair. Also, make sure that you add shadows in your skin around the hair because there is a shadow created by the volume of the hair itself, preventing light from hitting the top of that forehead. For this last one, I'm going to do just some little kinky hair. I'm erasing this, and then I'm going to go in with my lighter shade of hair, and I'm just going to fill in this whole shape. Once that's dried a little bit, you go in with that same color and you're going to just kind of stipple to create texture hair and to create shadow in the hair. Also coming up a little bit over this line that we created when drawing. This will help create that hair, that naturally curly texture. Focusing these stipples around the bottom of the hair, by the ear, and along the hairline, and then adding just a few on top of the hair. From here, we'll go in with our darker marker, and we will pick the right side of the marker, and we will go in and just add a few more dots to create darker shadows and more texture. And then I'll go in and I'll touch up this area and add any more shadows with the lighter marker that I think it needs. And you can do this on a bigger scale too. If you want to draw a fro, then, you know, you just make the shape bigger and do this throughout, focusing these shadows along the hairline and any spot where there is less light being reached. Okay. There you guys go. That's how you render hair. That's your super quick demo. Try it out with different hairstyles, different hair textures. It's a lot simpler than you think. Just make sure you add those highlights and then the shadows. That's all it is.